Have you ever heard of Carol Cow? She's just another Peppa Pig background character, having appeared only in the background of a few scenes. But did you know she has a hidden story that is very sad and tragic? Missing. We start to realize that Carol is more than just a background extra when we take a closer look at certain background scenes where the little cow was seen with another character, Mrs. Cow. The two of them seem to walk together every now and then, which suggests they have some kind of connection, probably as relatives. Many believe that Carol is Mrs. Cow's daughter, but that raises more questions than answers. After all, if that really is the case, why has Mrs. Cow never mentioned her daughter in any episode? And why didn't Carol appear at important moments in Mrs. Cow's life, like her wedding? Even Peppa and the other kids were there. It almost seems like Carol Cow truly disappeared, which might actually be the truth. What if she didn't just disappear from the show, but from the town itself? Not even Mrs. Cow would have any idea what happened to Carol. It's such a delicate subject that no one talks about it anymore, acting as if Carol never existed. So grab your popcorn and get comfy on the couch. Another Cinewave is starting. Deceased. The idea that Carol mysteriously vanished is very sad, but it could be even worse because no one knows what happened to the character. Therefore, nothing prevents the possibility that she may have passed away, and that was never told to any of us. For all we know, the adults in Peppa Pig might even be aware of this tragedy, but don't tell the children because it's too heavy. That's the very reason why this has never been confirmed even to us. Since this is a show aimed at very young children, that kind of harsh truth is avoided so no one gets traumatized, even though it does happen in the Peppa Pig universe, since we know the queen who appeared in some episodes passed away when Queen Elizabeth II, whom she was inspired by, also died in the real world. Of course, it would also make sense if even the adults didn't know the truth and believed that Carol simply disappeared. In that case, they would still hold hope that Carol will one day return without having any idea of the terrible truth about the little girl. This could have happened in many different ways, but we imagine that Carol may have lost her life in some accident, perhaps by drowning in the sea. That would explain why her body was never found, doesn't attend school. Even before disappearing completely, it seemed like Carol Cow's life already had some problems. Have you noticed that she doesn't appear at school with Peppa's other friends? I mean, she has been seen together with that group in the episode where the children go to watch a Mr. Potato Show. Yes, Carol is right there among the other kids, so she is indeed part of Peppa's class. Then why doesn't she appear in the other school episodes? That makes no sense at all. There is definitely something wrong here. Did Carol simply miss almost all her classes even before she vanished? If so, why? How would Mrs. Cow allow her daughter not to go to school? The more we think about it, the more it seems like there was something very wrong in Carol Cow's life. Something had been happening to her for a long time, preventing her from going to school and seeing her friends most of the time, and it's likely that this has a strong connection to the reason Carol disappeared without a trace. Sick. Okay, let's recap. Carol Cow always appeared very little throughout the show, despite being connected to a known supporting character, Mrs. Cow. She was also part of Peppa's school group, but almost never appeared with the other children. At some point, Carol simply vanished and no one ever mentioned her name again. All these strange things can be explained if, in fact, Carol has a very serious illness. Because of that, she would have to spend most of her life in the hospital, and that's why we rarely see her in the school episodes. That would also be the reason Carol didn't appear at her mother's wedding to Mr. Bull. She would have loved to be there, but couldn't go because of her illness. There's a small upside to this. Carol having health problems is terrible, but at least it means she may not have truly disappeared. She may simply be in the hospital. But the fact that Carol is never mentioned doesn't help raise our hopes. Within this context, Mrs. Cow's difficulty talking about the subject suggests that Carol's health is truly bad and shows no signs of improvement. If we explore a darker angle, it even becomes possible to assume that Carol really did pass away, only in this case, she would have succumbed to her illness instead of dying in an accident. So what do you think is the truth about this mysterious little cow? Comment below #Carol and tell us your opinion. Mistreatment. Mrs. Cow seems to have a good relationship with Carol, from the little we see of them together. But what if Mrs. Cow is actually the true villain of this story? This started to make a certain amount of sense from the moment we realized that Carol almost never went to school. This can indeed be explained by a possible illness, but if Carol is healthy, then it becomes really hard to explain. If Mrs. Cow truly is her mother, then it is her duty to make sure Carol is getting a proper education. If Mrs. Cow simply doesn't take Carol to school without any valid reason, that means she is a very irresponsible mother. And it gets worse when we remember that Carol wasn't at Mrs. Cow's wedding. We kept thinking she might have been sick or had disappeared, so she couldn't be present at such an important moment in her mother's life. But now that we're looking at this through a new lens, what if it was actually Mrs. Cow who stopped her from going? What if she did that to prevent Carol from asking for help because she was suffering abuse from her own mother? That would change everything we thought about Mrs. Cow and about her daughter. It's disturbing to think that Carol might be needing help right at this very moment. Divorce. The idea that Carol Cow is Mrs. Cow's daughter is widely accepted by fans, but we rarely stop to think about what that really means. Mrs. Cow recently married Mr. Bull, but it's obvious that Carol cannot be the biological child of both of them. They fell in love recently, and Carol is already a grown girl who was born long before this couple ever existed. In other words, if Carol is Mrs. Cow's biological daughter, she is the result of a previous relationship her mother had. Mrs. Cow must have divorced Carol's father some years ago, and we don't know what the little girl thinks about that. Did she feel sad about the separation, or does she not really care? Regardless of the answer, this divorce also helps explain Carol's disappearances. It's entirely possible that she has shared custody, having to spend some time at her mother's house and then some time at her father's. In fact, we think she spends more time with her father and only stays with her mother on specific days, which would be those days when we see them walking together in the background of episodes. Adopted. On the other hand, Carol doesn't necessarily have to be Mrs. Cow's biological daughter. What if she was actually adopted? Mrs. Cow has never mentioned a previous marriage before the one she had with Mr. Bull, so it wouldn't even be far-fetched. And it would even be nice if Peppa Pig included this kind of representation of an adopted child. But there's still a darker side to this, because if Carol was adopted, what happened to her original parents? Was she abandoned, or did they pass away in some accident? Any possibility is sad, especially if it was something recent rather than something that happened when Carol was still a baby. Only someone who was adopted knows how difficult it is to start living a completely new life with completely different people. In this case, we can only hope everything went well in Carol's adaptation process, and that she manages to live a very happy new life. But that will be difficult if she really has disappeared or is seriously ill. Another country. Speaking of that, there is another interesting explanation for why Carol Cow appears so little throughout the show, a much less sad explanation than the others we mentioned, and that would be that Carol lives in another country. Peppa Pig has shown many times that the characters travel to other countries, so what would prevent a character from another country from visiting England, which is where the series takes place? This could very well be Carol Cow's case. That's why she appears every now and then, always as a background character. Carol likes to travel to England from time to time, and when she does, she is guided around by Mrs. Cow. That appearance in the audience at Mr. Potato's show? She was just accompanying Peppa's school group as a guest. In fact, one of Carol Cow's appearances is at a train station in London, next to Mrs. Cow, as if she had just arrived from another country and met up with Mrs. Cow. Things really start to make sense when we follow this logic. The subscribe button is right there, waiting for you. How about clicking and keeping up with everything we post? Distant cousin. If Carol is from another country, it makes more sense that she isn't Mrs. Cow's daughter, but rather a relative, perhaps a distant cousin, or who knows, a niece, with Carol's parents also living outside England. Every time Carol and Mrs. Cow meet, it's a meeting that happens only once in a while, so Mrs. Cow can help the young girl explore the country. Carol definitely stays at Mrs. Cow's house while she's in England. And before you find it strange that Carol's parents apparently don't travel with her, it's worth remembering that the countries of the United Kingdom, where England is located, are very close to one another, so you can travel from one to another by car or by train. Assuming Carol lives in another UK country, like Scotland for example, it's more than possible that her parents let Mrs. Cow pick her up and bring her back. Stepdaughter. Finally, what if Carol is actually Mr. Bull's daughter instead of Mrs. Cow's? That would make Carol Mrs. Cow's stepdaughter. Nothing has ever been said about Mr. Bull never having been married before falling in love with his current wife, so he could very well have been a father all this time. Now that Mr. Bull is married to another woman, Mrs. Cow would be considered Carol's stepmother. That is, if Bull really is her biological father, of course. The fun doesn't stop here. There are 2 amazing videos waiting for you on the screen. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.